Hello, everyone. This is such an exciting day for me, actually, because this is the day that I officially record the first episode of the rebrand of my podcast. So I've been podcasting for 5 years, and it's absolutely one of my favorite things, but my podcast has gone through so many different iterations over the years. And in the fall of 2022, I actually rebranded my podcast to House of Wealth from the Wealth Witch podcast. I'll be sharing more about that this week in the event. But over the last several months, it's just felt like House of Wealth wasn't quite the right name. And I had stepped back from recording for a while, and I was ready to kind of relaunch the podcast. And it was just so clear, like, that the podcast was meant to actually be called House of Health. And I think after hearing this story today of basically pre-birth through this year, which I'm about to turn 48 on the 1st. What day is that? Sunday? I think Sunday is the 1st. The podcast will now be called House of Health. And like I said, I think you're going to understand why. So thank you so much for being here. If you're here live with me, it means a lot to me. I love having interaction and being able to see people and feel people's energy while I'm recording. So I really appreciate that. I am streaming this live into my Black birthday event called the Longevity Lounge. And I'm going live on my House of Health Instagram page. So we're in all the places, but if you are listening to this as a replay on the podcast, I'm so happy that you're here as well, at whatever point that you happen to be listening to this. So today is a big day. It is the official kickoff of House of Health. I am also releasing a blog of the same name on Substack this week. I am throwing my hat into the world of health politics, which is something that has actually been a passion of mine for a really, really long time. That's part of the story that you're going to hear again today as well. I think just because of the nature of my personal health journey, I have really been a student of alternative medicine, Eastern medicine, and Western medicine. And I think because I grew up and had so many issues and was sick, and have been dealing with that kind of stuff my whole life, I really wanted better for my children. And so during my first pregnancy, I did a lot of research on pharmaceuticals and vaccines. And so a lot of that first pregnancy really shaped where I am now. So I'm really excited to share this journey with you today. I'm a little bit nervous because it's kind of a lot. We'll just see how good I am at doing this in, a way that makes sense and flows. And I'm just going to riff. And then at the end, I will open up for Q&A for those of you that are live. But it's a big day. It's a really big day for me, and I'm excited. So I'm so happy, those of you that are joining me, that you're here, to kind of be witness to this next chapter in my life. So first, I'll just address the Longevity Lounge and Black birthday. You now know why this event is called House of Health, right? I just explained that. The Black birthday comes from that my birthday, December 1st, typically falls between Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And so in my coaching business that I had for many, many years, I would always do these Black birthday sales. And they would be these huge blowout sales where I would give the best deals. Giving gifts is one of my love languages. So I would just have so much fun during my Black birthday sales, giving courses and things for ridiculous amounts of money. And this year I was I want to do something, but I'm not coaching right now. So I'm not selling any programs. And I was well, you know what? I really let's have this be the relaunch of the podcast, the launch of the blog. And then let me just share with you all of the incredible tools, hacks, tips, people that have helped me over the last year and a half to radically transform my health. And so I put this event together, and I'm going to be interviewing some people that were really, really influential in my journey over the last year and a half. The first of which will be tomorrow, and it will be Dr. Stephanie Rimka. And I'm so excited for this one because it's actually called Boobs, Bobby Kennedy, and Botulism. So I'm not going to tell you much more than that because I want you to come and listen to the session. But Boobs, Bobby Kennedy, and Botulism is the title of the session tomorrow with Dr. Stephanie Rimka, who has been like one of the most influential people in my health transformation over the last year and a half. I'm so incredibly blessed to call her a friend now. And I'm so excited for you to hear from her on these topics. It's going to be a really fun session tomorrow. So that's actually happening at 10 a.m. Bali, which is 9 p.m. Eastern. So, but if you are in the group, you will see the notification later today for that call. And if you are watching on Instagram, send me a DM that says health, and I will get you access to the Facebook group so you make sure you don't miss that session, because this is the only session that I will be streaming live to Instagram. Let's see if I have any other housekeeping that I need to chat with you guys about. So yeah, there is a Google Calendar link in the group. So just go into the Facebook group and make sure that you put your email address that's compatible with Google Calendar in that calendar link. And then we'll add you to the Google Calendar so you'll know exactly when all the sessions are happening in your time zone. So this will run today through December 3rd. And we will have sessions and trainings like every single day from now to then. And all of the sessions will eventually go up on House of Health. So if somebody wants to, watch or listen there, that'll be available to them, but those won't be happening real time there, obviously. This event is going to be about all of the things that I love. And so a lot of that is health related. I also am a podcaster and I love podcasting, and I am actually getting ready to launch a course called So You Want to Podcast with my podcast manager that I've been working with for several years. That is a course that actually teaches you how to start and run your own podcast. And so we will also be launching that at the end of this week. We have an epic 3-day live event that we ran that we're going to be rerunning on the 29th, 30th, and 1st this week. And so stay tuned for more information on that. So if you are somebody who loves podcasting or has a message that needs to get out into the world or has thought about podcasting, you definitely want to check out that event. And we will be officially kicking off our podcast course the first week of January. So stay tuned for that as well. And a friend of mine was like, don't you feel like that's a bit all over the place for the event? Like, you're going to be talking about podcasting, and you're going to be talking about health, and you're going to be talking about new age spirituality, and you're going to be talking about Jesus. And I was like, nope, because those are all the things that I love. And it's my birthday, so I get to do whatever I want. So take what serves you, leave the rest. There may be some of this that really resonates with you this week. And you might be like, yep, I'm all about it. And there might be some that doesn't. And that's great as well. But I hope that you find massive value here this week. It is certainly my intention to, share with you not only everything that's worked, but the things that didn't work as well. Because this has not in any way stretch of the imagination been an easy journey for me. And you'll hear, more about that today, and you'll certainly hear about that more over the week. But my intention is just to be very, very real with you about where I came from, where I was, and how I got here. And, it's interesting because I'm like, I can't tell that story without talking about God because God was a huge part of me actually being able to radically transform my health and be in a place today where I really truly feel, I've got some aches and pains, but I really truly feel that I am the healthiest, the happiest, and the most content that I've ever been in my life. So with that, let's kick off this story. All right. So I'm Leah Steele. I think everybody knows that, but I'm Leah Steele. I was born Leah McEwen in Grand Rapids, Michigan on December 1st, 1976, in like the worst snowstorm in Michigan history. I was 2 weeks late, but my story actually started long before that day that I was born in Michigan. My mom was a PhD student, high functioning alcoholic and drug addict, and did not know that she was pregnant with me until she was 5 months pregnant. She weighed about 90 pounds at the time and was completely surprised to find out that she was pregnant and had been drinking and using drugs that entire 5 months. So through that first trimester of my development, I was not in a very hospitable environment, to say the least. My mom then went on to get sober. She was also smoking during that time, but she went on to get sober and stopped smoking. However, she did smoke weed with me the whole entire time she was pregnant with me. Interesting little fun fact about me. I've never been able to smoke weed because I get violently ill every time I've tried. So interesting how things happen like while you're in gestation and then how that impacts you later in life. So, my mom had an extremely hard, very long labor. I was 2 weeks late. So, I was roughly 9 pounds. I was just under 9 pounds when I was born, and I got stuck in the birth canal, and I was stuck in the birth canal for a pretty long period of time. And this was, back in the way back when they used forceps to pull babies out, and I was pulled out of the womb with forceps. I just mentioned that because I have some structural damage to my body that, several of the chiropractors that I've seen have said potentially could have been caused by that forceps delivery. I was born with a hole in my heart. So, not sure why that happens. And lots of babies are born with the hole in the heart, but it is, very possible that the drug use, the smoking, the non-hospitable womb environment for the first 5 months of my gestation led to me having that hole in my heart. And so that for me was, it ended up closing on its own. So I didn't have to have surgery, but I have I don't have a lot of childhood memories, but some of the ones that I do are, in the hospital because I was always having to go in and get checked and monitored, because of this hole in my heart. So I was vaccinated. I was bottle fed, all those beautiful things that we did with our kids in the 70s, right? And I had a ton of respiratory illness as a child, including strep throat. And that was just always that was how my body manifested sickness, was through respiratory illness. My mom was a smoker, so I grew up around cigarette smoke. It was the 70s. I think everyone was a smoker pretty much in the 70s, certainly in Detroit, Michigan. My parents actually separated when I was 2, and my mom moved back to Idaho. So I moved to Idaho from Michigan when I was 2 years old. And my mom was an alcoholic and a drug addict until I was 6 years old. And so there were a lot of very, very traumatic experiences that I personally experienced as a child. I'm actually not going to go into that stuff on this live stream, but just know that, up until the point that I was 6 years old, I experienced things that no 6-year-old should ever experience. The reason that I share that part is that we know that trauma gets stored in the body, right? We know that the things that happen to us in childhood stay with us. The body keeps score, as Louise Hay would say, right? And while I'm not all gung-ho New Age spirituality anymore, I absolutely believe that that is the truth. Our bodies are incredible vehicles of manifestation, and they manifest the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay. And they store that trauma as a protection mechanism because it helps us to react later in life as we're going through other traumatic situations. So, I'll just say that there was a fair amount of trauma experienced up until the point that I was about 6 years old, when my mom got sober. And my mom got sober at 6, and she straight away, went into working in addiction treatment. So I grew up from 6 years old in addiction treatment facilities. My mother is one of the most smart, most brilliant women I've ever met in my life. She is highly intelligent, and as a result, very quickly, moved up and went back to school. She was a speech and language pathologist, so she had a lot of clinical experience working with people, and she just had a passion. She's always been in the helping profession. She had a passion for helping people. And so she ultimately did end up going back and getting her master's in social work and became a globally renowned addiction treatment therapist. So I grew up in treatment centers. I grew up around addicts and alcoholics and in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. My mom went to meetings every single day. She was sponsoring up to like 30 people. And so I always had addicts and recovering addicts and alcoholics in my home. And most days of the week in my childhood, you could find me on the floor of an Alano club doing my homework or reading a book. So I grew up in 12-step meetings. And I think that, that for better or worse, also anchored in me this desire to help people. And to see people recover and to see people be happy. That was a bit of a tangent. So lots of respiratory illness as a child. So basically I was on antibiotics my whole life because I was always having these respiratory illnesses or pulmonary things going on. So antibiotics and steroids became a part of my life really early on. And we know now what that does in somebody's system when it's just used over and over and over again. Well, it got to the point that when I was 12 years old, I had strep throat 12 times in 12 months and was put on a course of antibiotics 11 of those 12 times. And on the 12th time, and it was literally like every time, well, we'll take your tonsils out, but we've got to get you over the strep throat in order to take the tonsils out. And then by the time it was time to take the tonsils out, I had strep throat again. And at that point, it was just that it wasn't going away because my body couldn't recover from it because of all of the antibiotics in the system. They weren't doing anything to the strep throat at that point. The 12th cycle of antibiotics landed me in the hospital and I almost died. I had anaphylactic shock to the penicillin, and I came out of that and I still had strep throat, and a doctor in his infinite genius put me on C-chlor, which is in the penicillin family. And I had another more severe allergic reaction to that. I developed wheals. I don't know if you've seen these hives. They're called wheals. They're about this big and they're flat in the center. They look like a donut, look like a wheel all over my body, inside my throat. My throat started closing. And so that landed me in a situation where it began my histamine issues in my body. And I had to be on steroids for 6 months. And I was on heavy dose antihistamines for 2 years after that to keep my histamine reaction in check. And at that point, like, had an allergy test. I was allergic to everything. Like that anaphylactic shock and histamine reaction just set off a series of events in my life that, to this day still give me grief. Okay. So I was 12 to 13 is when that happened. At 13, I became a vegetarian, and I was a vegetarian from 13 to 19. Okay. But I was not a vegetarian. I was a high school vegetarian with a non-vegetarian family. Okay. So I was basically a carbitarian, and I knew nothing about supplementation or supplementing. And so I was not eating anything that was putting nutrients into my body. Oh, something I should share here. I did not know this at the time. I did not know this until many, many, many years later, but I have the MTHFR gene mutation. So the MTHFR gene mutation, for those of you that aren't aware, impacts and affects your methylation pathways, which is part of the reason why I was having difficulty with the antibiotics. I mean, anybody would have difficulty with that level of antibiotics, but why I had difficulty with the antibiotics, when the steroids would get in my system, I couldn't process them out correctly, which led to long-term issues as well. So methylation pathways. But the other thing that MTHFR does is it makes it so that you don't absorb a certain percentage of the nutrients from your food. Now, I'm very blessed that I have the variant that I absorb 70% of the nutrients from my food. So there's only 30% that I don't absorb. Other people have it the reverse, where they don't absorb 70%. So I do feel incredibly grateful that I have the lesser of the two genetic mutations. But if you think about that for a moment, in those developmental years, after being on all of these antibiotics, being vegetarian, not properly supplementing, and not absorbing nutrients from my food, it was a recipe for physical disaster, essentially. I also went on birth control at 14. So add in that extreme hormone disruption. At 14, I took the pill for a little while, but quickly got convinced by Planned Parenthood to start taking Depo-Provera. And I took Depo-Provera for years. And so I'm going to do a whole episode on the podcast about Depo-Provera, Planned Parenthood, birth control, and all of that. So I'm not going to go into that today, but just know that it's something that I'm incredibly, incredibly passionate about. One, exposing, two, talking about. And I think as women, we really, really need to evaluate how we are teaching our young women about family planning and about their cycles, because the reality is that nobody needs to be taking pharmaceutical, hormonal, endocrine disrupting birth control. But that's on us. That's on us as parents to start really educating, so that women aren't destroying their bodies with these pharmaceuticals. Okay. So around 17 years old, I started having my first inflammation, flare-ups, and structural issues. And it started as just, I was in pain all the time, and I couldn't, it hurt to touch me. So if you touched me on the arm, it hurt, and lightly. And I was like, what's going on? So my mom, on the heels of my allergic reaction at 12, my mom dove into the world of Eastern medicine. And so I started having acupuncture at 12. So yes, we were depending upon Western medicine for some things, but I was also seeing all the acupuncturists and all the cranial sacral therapists and all the Western medicine people, starting about 12 years old. So I was exposed to that world very, very early. So I started seeing massage therapists and cranial sacral therapists because my fascia in my body was completely inflamed. All of my fascia in my body was so inflamed that it hurt to touch me. And that's sort of when my chronic pain started. But, and I don't know if it was because I was so young, but it was I got used to it. So I started living in pain at 17, but by the time I was 19, it was almost like I didn't recognize that it was pain, if that makes sense. I just thought I was fine, I guess is the only way that I could explain it. But if I, but I just had discomfort that I lived with in my body. So, shortly after high school, I actually stopped being vegetarian, but I, essentially ate a standard American diet, a sad diet all through my 20s and 30s. Okay. And, at 19, I moved to New York City. I ran nightclubs. I often say that I didn't become an addict or an alcoholic for lack of trying. I drank all the alcohol. I did all the drugs. I lived super, super party, glitz and glamour lifestyle in New York City. Okay. So abused my body basically all through my 20s. And also started the diet train then, right? Started the insecure about the body, trying every single fad diet out there, during that time. So 20s and 30s were a train wreck, essentially. Interestingly enough, I didn't have a lot of health problems during that time. That was probably and maybe I was just numbing them all with drugs and alcohol. I don't know, but I wasn't experiencing a lot of pain during that time. And I didn't have a lot of flare-ups. My whole life I had respiratory illness. So, I would get really bad sinus infections, really bad strep throat, like 3 or 4 times a year. And so that just was my norm. And I would take a Z-Pack for that. Literally every time I got sick, I would just take a Z-Pack, take the antibiotics, right? The ones that weren't going to cause anaphylactic shock. So I still at that point was regularly up to about 4 times a year taking antibiotics, which was clearly destroying my gut and the health of my body. 28, I get pregnant with Josiah, who is my oldest biological son. And massive, massive high risk pregnancy. I had a placental abruption. The placenta I had a hemorrhage in my uterus. The placenta attached to the hemorrhage in my uterus. And I was referred to a doctor. I was living in California at the time. I'd moved to California, was living in California. Was referred to a specialist in California. His name's Dr. Paul Crane. He actually has delivered all of the Kardashian babies. He's a very well-known celebrity, OBGYN, and he wouldn't take me on as a client. And so I went into his office and he said, I've been delivering babies for 30 years. I've never seen anyone with this deliver a baby. Come back in 2 weeks. And I'd come back in 2 weeks and he'd do another ultrasound and he'd say, in 30 years, I've never seen anybody with this condition deliver a baby to full term. Come back in 2 weeks. So as you can imagine, I split up with the father of my child at 5 months pregnant. I was under like a crazy amount of stress. There were some personal things going on between his father and I that caused stress, but I was a mess. This whole, the first 5 months of my pregnancy, thinking I was going to lose my baby. And I was sick. Like when I tell you I was sick, I was so sick, you guys. Like I lost 10 pounds in the first 2 months of my pregnancy. I went on to gain 75, but I lost 10 pounds. I was just a mess and ended up spent the majority of that pregnancy on bed rest. So I was living in California at the time. I was helping to run a celebrity sober living home with my mother. And so I had a lot of really interesting connections. So one of those connections introduced me to a pediatrician. And that pediatrician was he was all the celebrity kids pediatrician, and he was anti-vaccine. And you had to go interview with him. You had to meet him. And so I went and I had the session with him and I just really liked him. And he didn't push an anti-vaccine agenda on me, but he gave me 10 books by 10 different doctors to read. And he said, I think it's really important before you have your baby that you educate yourself. And after reading these books, if you choose not to vaccinate, you can join my practice, is essentially what he said. So this is this pediatrician in Santa Monica, and when I say everybody's kids went there, everybody's kids went there. So it's an interesting dynamic. And even over the years, seeing the people that are pro-vaccine, I know aren't vaccinating their kids because I knew that they were in that practice. So a little bit of interesting dynamics there. But so I had a lot of time on my hands because I was on bed rest. And I just studied. If you guys know me, those of you that know me are probably laughing right now. I'm a researcher. I'm a studier. I want to know all the things about all the things, and I will go down a rabbit hole like nobody's business. Like I will find and uncover things that people have never even seen before. So I spent a large amount of my pregnancy on bed rest researching vaccines. And I made the decision to not vaccinate my son. And I joined the practice of this pediatrician. So my pregnancy went on, lots of complications, lots of issues throughout that pregnancy. But I was determined I was going to have a home birth. So I had this beautiful, incredible midwife that was working with me. And after 29 hours of natural childbirth, at home. And this was kind of crazy because I'd been having ultrasounds at that point, like every 3 days. Cause I still had all these issues in my uterus and with the placenta. And every single issue that you can have in pregnancy, I had in that first pregnancy. And so 2 days before I went into labor, I had an ultrasound and he was in position. He was dropped, like it was ready to go. So when I went into labor, we thought everything was fine. Well, 29 hours later, and I'm like in excruciating pain. They can't figure out why I'm in excruciating pain because I'm only dilated to a 2. My midwife is like, we need to take you to the hospital. Like, we got to go see what's going on. So we go to the hospital and he had flipped. So his spine was on my spine. And so all through that labor, and Sister Vic is watching and I can see her face. She's like, not good. So I was feeling spine on spine compressions is what was happening. That's why I was in so much pain. So, and I was exhausted at that point. My body was so depleted anyway from every single thing that had gone on during this pregnancy. I was exhausted, and Dr. Paul Crane is an amazing, amazing doctor. And I know sometimes like we see these celebrity doctors and we kind of roll our eyes, but I will tell you that this man was so amazing. And he said, look, you can keep doing this. This was on a Tuesday. Okay. He's like, you can keep doing this, but we're probably going to be here till Thursday. I'll support you as long as your body will take it. He was like, but my recommendation is at this point, they had broken my water at this point. And I still was not I was not dilating. They were like, first he said, let's try some Pitocin. And I was like, okay, I didn't want to do that, but I was like, okay, took the Pitocin. And then Josiah's heart rate it was so traumatic on him too. His heart rate started dipping. And the doctor was like, look, like the only thing I'm really concerned about is the health of the baby at this point. His vitals are a bit all over the place. And so ultimately I chose to have a C-section. And so I went into a C-section after 36 hours in labor. They gave me an epidural. I had a reaction to the epidural. I'm allergic to epinephrine. I did not know that at the time because I had never had an epidural before. So they took him, but I ended up in a state of shock. My body went into a state of shock. And so I had to be in a recovery room for 9 hours and didn't get to see him for 9 hours. Luckily, my mother was there, and made sure that they didn't do anything to him. They didn't give him a bath. They didn't shoot him up put vitamin K in his eyes. They didn't put the ointment in his eyes. They didn't shoot him with vitamin K. They didn't give him the Hep B vaccine. They didn't do any of the things that I didn't want them doing to him. Thank goodness my mother was a watchdog over him that whole entire time. So recovery was incredibly difficult. My body was just a mess at that point. The allergic reaction to the epinephrine was really difficult. I stayed in hospital for 4 days and then went home. I had a lot of difficulty nursing. Like it was not the birth experience I wanted. And I think that was probably the first time, even though I had been through all of these health things, that was really probably the first time that I felt like my body failed me. And that point, I think, is when I turned on my body. Like I was like, you failed me. And then instead of living in like harmony with my body, it was like from that moment on, I was out of harmony with my body. I wanted this home birth. I wanted this beautiful experience of delivering my child. And I just felt horrible. I felt awful. And then nursing was difficult and I couldn't nurse. I nursed for 5.5 months, but it was incredibly painful and difficult and horrible the whole entire time. And I think I started doubting myself a little bit at that point as well. And, all of that stuff, it doesn't add up to healthy mental and physical state. My sciatica pain started during that pregnancy. I also had a 2.5-inch, abdominal diastasis. I didn't know that at the time. That would come to light later, but that diastasis certainly led to the back issues that I started having. So then I became vegan again. Vegan for the first time. I'd been vegetarian before. Then I became vegan and had about 4 years of feeling pretty good. Like, had a little bit of difficulty getting the pregnancy weight off. Again, I gained 75 pounds, so it was a lot. Like, had a little bit of difficulty getting back down. It took about 2 years to really get like back down to where I was before. Then at 32, I had a massive allergic reaction to a very, very popular, very, very expensive skincare brand. And I started getting these dry patches on my face. Went to like 10 dermatologists. They couldn't figure out what it was. And they put me on, I mean, like these patches were so bad and so itchy. They put me on steroids, again. And so I was on steroids for months. And that was the point that I started, like, so I couldn't use anything. I tried every single organic skincare line there was. Like, I couldn't use anything on my skin. Everything I would put on would give me hives or would create these dry spots on my face. So I created my own skincare line at that point with all natural ingredients. And I kind of at that point started down my like no tox lifestyle. And started researching again. I start researching, what all these chemicals are in our cleaning products and in our laundry detergent and in our skincare that are causing these reactions. And so I started making my own laundry detergent and making all my own household cleaners and making my skincare and making my body wash, and like went into this whole like super non-tox lifestyle from probably, at that point, 32 until I moved to Bali. And it was much harder to get the things that I needed to make that kind of stuff. But so that sort of started that journey, and, researching and like really starting to understand how the chemicals disrupt the systems of the body. So I started really removing toxins from our home. I had back-to-back car accidents, interestingly enough, on the exact same day, September 20th, when I was 33, car accident. September 20th, when I was 34, car accident. Got hit both times and really was in a lot of pain after the first accident and started seeing a chiropractor. And that was the first time. Oh, I guess I didn't mention I have scoliosis. I had scoliosis. So I knew that from like the elementary school testing that you did, like I knew I had scoliosis in my upper back. But I went to see this chiropractor and they were like, "Oh, you're a mess." And they started adjusting me, and I started going in for adjustments like 2 or 3 times a week. And I was in so much pain. Like I would just be crying. And I like all through the week I would be in pain. And so I finally stopped going to the chiropractor because I just couldn't, like it hurt so bad. And when I stopped going, the pain went away. I mean, I still was having like flare-ups and stuff, but the constant pain went away. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So the next year I get in a car accident again, go back to the same chiropractor, but I see a different chiropractor in this office. I see the head chiropractor in the office, and he's like, hold on, I want to do another x-ray. And he sends me back in to get an x-ray, and I come out and he's like, I don't think this is from the accident. I think this is from birth. This structural stuff that we're seeing that we're trying to adjust. And he's like, your head is sitting on your atlas sideways, and on one side, you have no disc, like it's completely compressed. So it's bone on one side. He's like, your neck is completely curved the wrong direction. And then you've got this scoliosis in your upper back. He's like, but what we see is that the body will do whatever it needs to do to keep the eyes even on the horizon. So it will adjust the body in a way that the eyes stay level. And he's like, that's what this looks like to me. I think we've been trying to adjust a lifetime structural, like, what's the word I'm looking for? The body had adjusted for its irregularities, and they were trying to adjust it out of me, which is what was causing all the pain. And he was like, so we're not going to treat you like that. We're going to actually go in and just try to adjust the things that we can. But he said, he was basically like, you need to start doing traction. There are all these things that you need to start doing. He's like, if you don't do this, you're going to be in a wheelchair by the time you're 50. He was like, your degeneration in your discs is bad enough that you're going to be in real trouble. And I was having issues with L5 and L4. So my C5 and my C6 and my L5 and my L4 have been my major issues in my back. And so I went for a while, but you know how it is when like, I don't know. For me, I just feel like always with my health, I've always taken it for granted. Like that's just the reality of it. And as soon as I start feeling better, I'm like, that's a pain. Like I was having to drive to a different city to go to this chiropractor. And I was just like, I'm feeling better. I'm going to stop going. Right? Like, and that was always how I'd been. Like I just took my health for granted. And so I got pregnant again at 36, with Jack, and right out the gate, complications with the pregnancy again. You know, there are women out there that are built to have babies, and bless you, you know, that are like, I love being pregnant. Pregnancy is awesome. I hate being pregnant. Pregnancy is horrible. It was like the worst 2 times of my life, pretty much, like being pregnant. My body, I felt like was just completely, you know, and at this point, obviously I'd already had one pregnancy that I felt like my body failed me. I think I went into this one so apprehensive. I likely manifested a lot of the issues that I had just because I was so paranoid about it. But I did have real issues in the pregnancy. I had, another placental abruption, and just tons and tons of preterm labor stuff, and straight away started getting these hormone headaches. I don't know if you're familiar with pregnancy hormone headaches, but I can tell you that they were, to date, the worst thing that I've experienced in my health. The most painful, like to the point that I had to have my husband take the guns out of the house because I was afraid that I was going to hurt myself. Like it was bad. It was really, really bad. So go through that pregnancy. Interestingly enough, like Jack, I'm having all this preterm labor, all these issues. So they give Jack steroids while he's in the womb because they're afraid that he's not going to come to term. Right. And now I just look back on that and I'm like, oh, what did we do? Like, why did I do that? Like, why did I let them do that? Because he ended up having some issues as a result of that as well. You know, like the least amount of pharmaceutical intervention, the better, I think, is the main lesson that I've learned through my whole health journey. Like, do it natural as much as you can possibly do it natural. Like, only depend on Western medicine and pharmaceutical intervention when you are in like crisis. And a lot of the things that we think are crisis are not crisis. So you'll hear more on my soapbox about that through the week and certainly on the podcast for episodes to come. Got a hernia. That diastasis reared its ugly little head and became even worse during this pregnancy. Had a hernia. Lots and lots of issues with Jack throughout the pregnancy, lots of preterm labor. And so I actually had a scheduled C-section with Jack. And yeah, I mean, he was lots of health things with Jack as well, which is for another episode. I'll share in another episode. But recovery from that C-section, not quite as bad, but my body hadn't been in trauma, like in labor for 36 hours. It was planned, right? I went into the hospital in the morning. I had the spinal, I had the C-section. So the recovery was much easier in that pregnancy. However, that delivery was the beginning of the fall apart for me, for sure. So I was vegan. I was breastfeeding. I think it's of note to mention that I started my journey into New Age spirituality, while I was pregnant with Jack, actually. I'd been in the New Age spirituality world. My mom was in the New Age spirituality world, so I'd been in it and around it, but I really took a deep dive into it during that time. And certainly like in the years following Jack's birth, I breastfed for 3.5 years, which I'm so happy that I had the ability to do. But in hindsight, again, I was vegan. I was not supplementing properly, and I had the MTHFR gene mutation. And I was getting no nutrients in my body. I was so skinny. Like, I lost so much weight so quickly. I was the littlest I'd ever been in my whole entire life. And a year in, and then I had like the post-pregnancy hair shed. If you've had a baby, you know what that is. You have that post-pregnancy hair shed and then your hair grows back. Well, a year after I had Jack, I started losing all my hair again. And I was exhausted. Like I was just exhausted. By 2:00 in the afternoon, I had to lay down and take like a 3-hour nap. I couldn't, I just felt exhausted all the time. And so I went to see my naturopath and we did tests and I came back that I had hypothyroidism. And so he put me on like the most natural thyroid medication I could be on. And that worked really well. And it worked really well for about a year. And then my body went into reverse T3 syndrome, which is a thyroid condition. And I just kept vacillating between hypo and reverse T3. And so it was incredibly difficult to medicate it. I developed adhesive capsulitis in both of my shoulders. Adhesive capsulitis, or frozen shoulder. You may know it as frozen shoulder. It's caused by thyroid issues. This is something that's so fascinating to me. They don't know why there's a connection between the thyroid and adhesive capsulitis, but there is. So adhesive capsulitis is a thyroid metabolism issue. So I had adhesive capsulitis in both shoulders. I couldn't raise my arms around above here, either of them. That's incredibly difficult when you have a toddler, by the way, to not be able to have full function of your arms. And guess what they started me on? Steroids and cortisone shots. So I'm back on steroids. Well, this time my body's like, all right, enough of these steroids. Have you ever seen moon face? Have you ever seen what they call moon face? So when your body gets tired of having steroids, maybe I'll try to find a picture and put it in the group so you guys can see it. But when your body finally says, steroids don't work for us, your face turns into a moon. Like my face was perfectly round. I had so much swelling and inflammation in my face. It was round, like this, like no jawline, just completely round. And so I knew I had to stop taking the steroids. So I stopped taking the steroids. But I had, as many cortisone injections as I could get in my shoulders. About this time, my naturopath said to me, who was vegan, by the way, my naturopath was also vegan, said, Leah, you got to start eating meat. You're going to die. Like your bloods, you are wasting away and you've got to start eating meat. And so I did. And I started feeling better. As soon as I started eating meat, my adhesive capsulitis resolved. So that was huge for me. And then my business crashed. Then my addiction treatment business that I'd been running, my highly successful addiction treatment business, crashed and we lost everything. We lost $3 million. We ended up $1 million in debt. We lost our house. We lost our car. We were like 3 hours away from being homeless. I've got this little toddler, this little baby that I'm breastfeeding, and my health is a mess. And I entered into the most stressful period of my life. A whole slew of employees that I was responsible for. I mean, it just was like earth shattering and the lowest place financially like I'd ever been in my life, for sure. Like my husband was selling plasma to pay for diapers and formula. Like we had gone from like tons of money living in country club house on the hill, kids in private school, to my husband selling plasma to pay for diapers and formula. And yeah, so body, brain, everything enters into fight, flight, freeze, right? And I just basically lived there, I think, until about a year ago. Like I lived in that emotional state with my nervous system in fight, flight, freeze for 10 years, basically 9 years, 8 years, I guess, 8 years. So I gained 35 pounds really quickly. Inflammation just went crazy in my body, gained 35 pounds. Started my online coaching business, which became highly successful. Developed a really, really powerful adrenaline addiction to success and money. Scaled that business to 7 figures in about 18 months, moved to Bali, came to Bali, started seeing all the healers, all the energy workers, deep, journey into new age spirituality deepens at this point. And my chronic fatigue starts. Like body pain, chronic fatigue starts. I started doing plant medicine ceremonies to try to heal my body. They further depleted my body systems. Several of the plant medicine ceremonies, like in hindsight, I can look back and see the points where I just completely fried my nervous system. I crashed my endocrine system. My back started going out. So significant and severe back pain started. And then I got mold toxicity. So living in a house that was infested with mold for 7 months, and mold toxicity essentially took every single thing that I'd ever had in my life and times it by 100. I was operating on a 7 to 9, on a scale of 1 to 10 on the pain threshold on a daily basis. I was having 5 to 7 day migraines twice a month that were debilitating. My histamine reactions were completely off the chart. I was chronically inflamed. I was puffy. I was miserable. And I started for the first time in my life to feel really, really depressed. And my whole life started falling apart. Like my whole life started falling apart. I left Bali. I left my children with their father. We were separated at the time. I went to Portugal, started a health regimen, a hydrogen health regimen to try to heal the mold toxicity. But toxicity at that point had seeped into every single area of my life. And I was very aware of how miserable I was. And nothing was making me happy anymore. Money wasn't making me happy. My business wasn't making me happy. My clients weren't making me happy. I was fat. I was inflamed, and I was miserable, basically. I was morally corrupt. Like I really look back and I'm like, where did I lose myself along the way? Like, where did I lose my values? Where did I lose who I wanted to be? I got so caught up in the new age spirituality, online coaching chase for money. And the payoff that I got from that was so big. The reward was so big, but the sacrifice was bigger. And I just didn't realize it. And I'm going to talk more about this on the podcast. I'm not going to spend too much time on it today, but I do just want to say that one of the things that I've really been diving deeply into and that I've recognized is that my whole entire life, I've been a vessel for spirit since the time I was little, little. Like I've been prophetic. I've had spiritual gifts. Like my mom, talks about me being 2 and being out and being like, grandma's calling. And she'd be like, oh, you mean you want to call grandma when you get home? And I'd be like, nope, grandma's calling. And we'd get home and my grandma would call and she'd be like, oh, I called you at whatever time. I was saying to my mom, grandma was calling. So I've always been a vessel for spirit. And through my journey in new age spirituality, I have chosen to be a vessel for a lot of different spirits and a lot of different energies. And that all came with a price. And that price absolutely was my health. A price has to be paid. You don't just get without giving. And especially when it comes to money and manifestation and that world, it's incredibly toxic if you don't know what you're doing. And most people don't know what they're doing, including me. And yeah, the limelight and the fame and the fortune and the public recognition and approval, it's a drug, right? It becomes like a drug, and it's never enough. And so I was always in this place of like chasing the next dollar, chasing the next zero in the bank account. And it was never enough, by the way. Do you guys want to know something completely crazy and insane? I spent $1.5 million over the pandemic on champagne and hotels and clothes, and I have nothing to show for it. Like I had just gotten to, I'm looking back, I don't even recognize myself. I have no idea who I became. But I woke up one day in Portugal and I looked around me, figuratively and literally, and I was like, I don't like who I've become. I don't like anyone around me. Everyone around me is morally bankrupt. Everyone around me is in this same situation where they're chasing money. And I'm miserable. Like I'm really miserable. And I feel like I'm dying. Like I literally was like, and I'm dying. I knew I was dying. And I was listening to something and it said, there was somebody talking. I was listening to a podcast or something. And the person said, look at the 5 people that you spend the most amount of time with. Do you want your children to grow up to be like, would you want your children to grow up to be like those people? And I was like, hell to the no. Right? Like I do not want my children growing up to be like any of these people around me. And then the next question they asked was, if you died today, would you want those people raising your children? And it just hit me like a ton of bricks that I needed to change everything in my life. And thank God for my children, because they were the motivating factor in me actually getting serious about getting my life back on track. And so that day after I listened to that, I sat down and like I travel with big white paper because I'm a whiteboarder. So when I'm traveling, I like travel with these big pieces of paper so I can write on them and put like a fake whiteboard on the ground. So I literally like sat down that day and I mapped out everything that I had going on in my life, in my business. And I just put it all out on the floor in front of me. And I looked at it and I was like, what on these papers brings me joy? What on these papers makes me happy? And I was like, none of it. Like not one thing that I wrote down brought me joy or made me happy. And I fell down on my knees and I begged God. I was like, God, if you were there and you were listening, I cannot do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. My best laid plans have gotten me to this place. I am broken. I'm sick. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm lost. I have no idea where the path is, you know, and basically I'm just forging one with a machete every day. Like I could see no path. I was completely hopeless. And I just begged God. I begged. And I was like, I will surrender all of this. I will surrender everything. I will walk away from everything if that's what you tell me to do. And I was in such a low place that I said, I will even surrender my children. If it's in their highest and best good, I will surrender my children. I'd been away from my children for 5 months at this point, and I had never been away from 4 months, but I'd never been away from my kids, like longer than 2 weeks at the most. And God started talking to me. And the first instruction was to stop drinking alcohol. And I started drinking alcohol when I was 13 years old. And I had never had a period of longer than, during my first pregnancy, I went 3 months. My first trimester, I didn't drink. But my doctor actually had me start drinking red wine because he didn't want to put me on. So I started drinking a glass of red wine every night after my first trimester because he didn't want to put me on benzodiazepines, and my stress levels were so crazy. So I was drinking alcohol during that pregnancy. I had never gone longer than 3 months since I was 13 years old of not drinking. Now, I wasn't an alcoholic. And at this point, I was barely drinking at all. But God said, stop drinking. And I was like, okay. and I haven't had another drink since. God said, be carnivore. And I stopped eating anything but meat. And that began my journey of moving back into more traditional spirituality. Kicked off a very tentative pushback between me and Jesus, which we've now resolved. But I was raised in a family that was very much a New Age spirituality family. I have seen horrors of religious dogma in so many different ways and areas of my life. And I had a lot of resistance to Jesus. And so, but I started the journey, and after the surrender, I can't explain to you other than to say, I started feeling happy. And I started not feeling stressed, and my body started healing. And I had rapid improvements in inflammation, in pain, like within a couple of weeks. I had lost, I think, 25 kilos within, or 25 pounds. I'd lost 25 pounds within 6 weeks. I get confused, you guys, between kilos and pounds. 25 pounds, I think, within 6 weeks of stopping drinking and transitioning to a carnivore way of eating. But most importantly, like, my mental health stuff started resolving. And that I started like seeing clearly, and I didn't like what I saw. And I have to say that the next 6 months were some of the most painful of my life, not from a physical perspective, but from an emotional perspective. I had been numbing my emotions since I was 13 years old with alcohol. Literally, every time I would start to feel something, in hindsight, I can see it now. Every time I'd start to feel something, I'd just be like, oh, glass of wine. Didn't have to have 10. One glass of wine takes the edge off. And so I started feeling all these feelings. And interestingly enough, the most uncomfortable feelings weren't anger or rage or frustration or sadness. The most uncomfortable ones were happiness, joy, like stuff that I just had not felt. I had numbed myself with work and alcohol very, very successfully. I am an overachiever. I am a high performance person. Even in the midst of all of that sickness and illness, I was still working more and harder than most people. Like, I think there's going to be people that are going to listen to this or watch this and be like, one, I had no idea. Two, I can't figure out how, because I was still producing content like crazy. I have over 2,000 content videos on YouTube, you guys. Like, I was a content machine. At any given time, I was running 3 courses. Like, in the midst of all of this, in the midst of all of this stuff going on, all of these health things, right? So I was good at numbing everything with alcohol and with work. Work was a big one. So it's been an interesting last year and a half. I completely pulled back from my coaching business. I stopped coaching. I have been so incredibly blessed to have incredible affiliate opportunities that I've been sharing, incredible network marketing companies that I've been working with. And it's enabled me to like stay connected to my community and serve, and while using products that are actually helping me further this health journey. And, you know, I would just say over the last year and a half, this passion for health and longevity developed in me. And in true nature, as soon as I started getting healthy, I started studying all things health, all things longevity, all things food, pharmaceuticals, all the tips, tools, hacks, tricks, Oh, I guess I should also say I started getting Botox when I was 23. So all of my friends were estheticians. So I started getting preventative. I started injecting my face with botulism toxin at 23. Do you know, and if you don't, you're going to hear all about it tomorrow with Dr. Stephanie Rimka, but do you know that botulism toxin, there's a reason why I'm not saying the name brand because I just don't want this stuff to get flagged and taken down, but botulism toxin does cross the blood-brain barrier, even though they say it doesn't. And do you know that it impacts the empathy center of the brain? It deadens the empathy center of the brain. So on top of all this numbing that I was doing, I was also numbing emotions with botulism toxin 3 to 4 times a year. So I have had no fillers, injectables, botulism toxin in my body for the last 3 years. But I'm definitely still a vain person and I don't want to age gracefully. Like I want to do whatever I can do to be hot, young, fit, hopefully well into my hundreds, the way things are going with the longevity space these days. But I'm obsessed with longevity now, you guys. Like I've learned so much over the last year and a half that I'm so excited to share, from peptides to supplements to skincare to hair care to just different treatments, different things that we can do to lengthen our telomeres, to help repair our mitochondrial DNA. Like I feel like I've got a PhD in mitochondrial DNA at this point with all the studying that I've been doing. And there are real ways that we can actually live vitally healthy lives, but we have to be willing to make some changes. And it's funny because I actually went to church with a friend of mine yesterday who has been on a very similar path. She was actually part of that circle that I looked at and said, everybody here is morally corrupt. We both exited like this in different directions, both returned to traditional spirituality and found each other again. We were actually together yesterday and we were chatting and I said, the joy of my life is helping people. It always has been. I could not have wound up here in this place where I have the ability to help if I hadn't had my full journey from pre-birth to now, right? So I'm so incredibly grateful and thankful for everything I went through, and I wouldn't change any of it because it got me to this place that I am right now. And if you guys know me, those of you that know me, I always have said this, like, I don't get it until I get hit by a Mack truck. Like, I am not the person that can get the gentle nudges from God. That's not me. That's never been me. He has to hit me with a truck. And then I'm like, oh, I get it. So I had to have this extreme deconstruction of my whole entire life, right? And be alone and be by myself and sit with myself. And even though I'm an only child, like, I had to sit with myself. It required that to get to this place where I can actually now share my journey and I can help people. There's so much more to this story, but I hope that in sharing this, you can see why I'm actually so passionate about longevity. And I hope that this laid a foundation for you for the interviews that are going to be happening this week, the episodes of the podcast that are going to be releasing. I hope that this foundation has given you an idea of why I'm even doing this, why I'm so passionate about it. I know that everyone has the ability to live a healthy and vital life, but it's not easy. It requires dedication and discipline and devotion, and it requires a willingness to sacrifice things that give us comfort. I walked away from alcohol, and, while I wasn't an alcoholic, I come from 2 family lines of alcoholism. And when I said yes and decided to be obedient and stop drinking alcohol that day, I broke generational patterns. And I can't explain to you what that freedom feels like. It's a lightness that, like, to know, I said, no, I'm not continuing this pattern. Like, that is the breaking of generational curses, right? It is making a choice to say no to something that's been poisoning your family for generations. And to be willing to actually look at the research about certain things. And this is the thing that, like, I'm passionate about, that I see a lot of people put their head in the sand over and won't do. If women over 35 did the research on alcohol, they would never touch another drop of it again in their life. If you knew what it did to your body, if you knew what it did to your endocrine system, if you knew what it did to your brain, if you knew the risks associated with it, with you developing dementia or Alzheimer's, you would never touch another drop again. If you fully understood that it takes your brain 3 weeks to come back to baseline after one drink, would you still have your drink on the weekend? Would you still have those couple of cocktails once a month? Like, if you really truly understood that, if you understood the research, if you understood the science. And so this is why House of Health is important to me. It's everything that I've learned. And I've been right there. I've been in the trenches. I've done all the things. I've done all the drugs. I've drank all the drinks. I drank this island out of champagne on 2 occasions during COVID. Literally, no more champagne on the island of Bali. Paying $300 to $600 a bottle. Okay? I've done it all. I've drank it all. So I'm not somebody who hasn't been through it and experienced it here telling you what to do. Like, that's not my intention, but I do want to share my experience and what I've learned and my passions. And so with that, we officially relaunch House of Health. And we're going to be talking about all the things. And I have to share my journey with God through this because I wouldn't be here without that. And I really, truly believe that the healing from New Age spirituality is a big part of why I've had the success in my health journey that I've had. And I'm going to talk more about that on the podcast. We're not going to focus too much on that this week. But I will talk more on that on the podcast. We're going to talk about some controversial things this week. We're going to talk about some really controversial things on the podcast. You're going to hear stuff that you don't like. You're going to hear stuff that triggers you. You're going to hear stuff that's probably going to piss you off. And my invitation to you and what I hope for you is that you won't unsubscribe, that you won't stop listening, that what you will do is try to come in with an open mind and then go do your own research. And if something triggers you or something pisses you off or something sets you off, that's the thing you need to go research. That's the thing you need to go take a deep dive into. Don't take my word for it. Don't trust me. Just go do your own research. That thing that you're rejecting, the thing that you're like, oh, I don't need to do that. It's likely the thing that you need to do. Trust me, I know, because I knew I needed to stop drinking alcohol for years prior to doing it. I knew that New Age spirituality wasn't serving me for years before I chose to step away from it. The body is incredible. It is this absolutely amazing miracle suit that we walk around in. And we abuse it and we take our health for granted. I will never again take my health for granted. That's the thing that I can tell you. It is such a precious gift.